lock her up, lock her up. Wait, lock him up? There are a lot of misconceptions going around about Donald Trump's latest federal indictment, this one in Florida. Now, most media sources are making sure to twist the language around what an indictment is and what the outlook is for Trump to either make it sound way better or way worse, depending on where you get your news. As your favorite YouTube attorney, as America's attorney, it is my job to break down what you should know about this indictment in a non-biased and a factual way, just as it should be. So, lawyer up now, and let's do that. In case you didn't know, right, of course, like you didn't know, Trump is facing charges for willful retention of national defense information, conspiracy to obstruct justice, withholding a document or a record, corruptly concealing a document or a record, concealing a document in a federal investigation, scheme to conceal, and false statements and misrepresentations. This is just something slight, right? Oh, yeah. I'm kidding. These are some hefty charges, and they're all due to the 300-ish classified documents found at Trump's home since the end of 2021 and his decisions to resist efforts by the government to recover those same documents, allegedly. Now, in total, all 7 charges could result in a 100-year prison stint for President Trump. Not a good outlook for a 76-year-old man. But on the positive side, at least the prosecutor has scheduled court for June 13th and not the next day, June 14th, which is Trump's 77th birthday. But what do these charges mean? Well, we should first begin with what they don't mean. They don't mean that Trump has one foot in a jail cell. This is simply an indictment. And while that word does sound a bit intimidating, in simple terms, it's an accusation, but with a thorough federal investigation to back it up. So it's like a reinforced accusation. Now, there are people who get indicted who do not get convicted. Charges can be dropped, deals can be reached. I mean, Trump could theoretically win a trial. But as you likely know, in a normal situation, the DOJ doesn't indict unless they feel very, very sure that they can convict. And we should assume, although we don't yet know, that the DOJ has raised its own high bar for both the quality and the quantity of evidence before indicting someone who is so central to American politics. But still, he might not get convicted, might not go to prison. Fine. But what about the bail? When Trump first appears in court to answer for this charge, he will need to plead not guilty. And then the court will need to set the terms for his pretrial release. Because no one expects him to await trial in a jail cell, right? Of course not. So he may need to post bail. Now, if you or I got charged with a crime, we typically buy a commercial bond since most people just don't have a lot of cash sitting around. Now, presumably, Trump could just deposit all the money required by the court, no bondsman needed. But what about his passport? In most pretrial release situations, the accused must turn over his or her passport, relinquishing the right to leave the country. Presumably, Trump will be required to do that. Would that be enough? Trump owns some jets. Jets big enough to fly to other countries. Trump could leave our country without a passport. Obviously, no one knows the future. But we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that one of the possible, and indeed for Trump, one of the easiest paths forward is after he enters his not guilty plea, turns in his passport, he hops a personal jet and just flies away. There are places that he would be very well received, and we, the United States, couldn't haul him back here. Would he do that? Now, he would be an honored guest in many countries, so maybe? We'll just have to keep an eye on him. The charges don't mean that he's been convicted. Let me remind you, charged and convicted are two very different words with very, very different meanings. Many people are seeing the headlines and believe that it's a sealed deal. And while many have different predictions for the potential outcome of a trial, an indictment is just not the same as a conviction. So you might be wondering, when are we going to get a potential conviction? Or maybe, when's he going to be exonerated? Under the 7th Amendment, he has a right to a speedy trial. That's 9 months from this Tuesday if he's languishing in jail, which he won't be, but it's 12 months if he's out and about, which he will be. Okay, so by law, the trial has to start June 13th of 2024, right? Except that time can be extended either by agreement of the parties or a ruling from the court. And what's going on between now and then? Well, as you know, he has a 2 to 3 week trial in March of 24 in New York City. And then next June, he will be busy, presumably, campaigning. But later than June is no good as the election gets even closer. And were he to win in November of 2024, the general election, which honestly seems impossible, as president, he could nix the case against himself. This is all so very, very unusual. In some ways, Trump is kind of like campaigning for his own freedom. Vote for me. Speaking of campaigning, his indictment does not stop him from running or even winning the presidency. Now, as we all know, the qualifications for being elected president are being a natural-born citizen, being 35 years old, and having been a resident of the U.S. for the last 14 years. It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that candidates must not have a criminal record. Now, isn't it kind of funny, though, that while felons aren't allowed to vote in this country, there's a possibility that a felon could become our next president? Now, of course, Trump would have to be convicted and then win the election, which, depending on who you ask, is probably a long shot. But still, the possibility is out there in one of the various timelines of the future. Now, a classic campaign convention in terms of optics is showing the candidate vote for himself or herself the morning that the polls open. Now, for Trump, that would be awkward. Well, now that we've covered what this indictment doesn't mean for Trump, let's break down what it does mean. It does mean that we're not going to stop hearing about this, especially on the Republican side of the aisle. Already, his political allies in the House are coming to his aid. People say it's a dark day for America, etc. But is it? Maybe the darkness that's hanging over America is that all of the political party leaders on both sides are pushing 80 years old, and there's hardly any new leaders coming up, and very few new ideas. And it's mostly just government spending just spiraling out of control. Trump's charges are going to make it far easier for politicians on both sides of the aisle to not talk about ideas, not talk about change or progress or how to govern for the next 18 months. Instead, love him or hate him, politicians are going to be talking about Trump, not about America's future. So it is a dark day for America, I guess. The indictment means that a new phase of the criminal process is upon us. Most of the noise about Trump investigations comes, of course, from the media, not from law enforcement. It's likely that the agencies that are investigating him on various fronts and prosecuting him now on these two indictments, they will keep on laboring in relative, if not almost absolute silence. We also know that this may not be the last indictment of Trump. He has a separate investigation pending in D.C., and he has one in state court in Georgia. It is the fate of our nation to have to hear about Trump's scandals for the next 2 years. Unfortunately, our nation is unwilling to turn away from Trump, both in support and in hatred and criticism. Now, I understand it would hurt some office holders in the short term to turn away from him, but in the long term, of course not. Politics at its best is about ideas, not about people. Somehow Trump has galvanized about 32% of America that he currently matters more than ideas. At least that's how I see it. And that's a major L for our country. If politicians on both sides could just get back to ideas, we could move on from our obsession with this nonsense. Another thing we know is that the indictments of Trump are not the uprising, galvanizing events that he and his spokesman had postulated that they would be. Now, if you will recall, last winter, Trump and others said that there would be a mass revolt if he were charged with a crime. Well, that didn't happen in New York City, and it's very unlikely to happen in Miami, even if he expressly asks his supporters for that. The very successful criminal prosecutions of agitators involved in January 6th will likely have the effect that prosecutors wanted, to tamp down mass expressions of revolution. Now, on the other hand, it only takes one knucklehead to make things really, really bad for lots of people, and so we all have to be on our very best behavior. Finally, we know that the criminal court process that is playing out as criminal investigations are supposed to play out is going to be politicized by both sides. The Dems will say Trump is a bad man and the indictment proves it. Trump will say that he's a victim, that he's innocent, and the indictment proves it. In fact, he's already released a video claiming that he is totally, 100% innocent. But he is a very successful politician, so, how innocent can he possibly be? Because I know that many people are going to be asking themselves this question due to the belief that the justice system is targeting Trump in some way. Let's talk about why Biden isn't being indicted for his misplaced classified documents. Well, the answer is for the same reason that Pence isn't being indicted. According to the feds, when the reality of the document breach came to light, neither of those two obstructed, lied, or hid. They just turned things over. It's really not the initial breach that landed Trump where he is right now. Indeed, once again, the cover-up is worse than the crime. So, situation normal. So now you hopefully understand a bit more about the ups and downs of Trump's newest indictment. Unfortunately for him, his woes are nowhere near over, considering he's still under 2 more investigations. Now, I'm curious to know your pro se opinion. Knowing what you know about the classified documents scandal, do you think the special counsel has a chance at winning a guilty verdict? Drop your thoughts down below in the comments. Now, this is not my first video about missing classified documents on both political parties, so make sure you go check out these videos. I will be back soon. See ya. Bye.